Daniel had always been known as the kind of man who worked quietly and honestly. In his office, people often said, "If you need something done right, give it to Daniel." He was loyal, he was careful, and he never looked for shortcuts. His job at Weston Enterprises wasn't glamorous, but to him it was perfect. He liked the stability. He liked the way his colleagues respected him. And above all, he felt proud to be working under the company's most admired leader, Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris was charming, confident, and always carried himself like a man in control. Everyone in the building admired him. People whispered about how smart he was, how he never made mistakes, and how he always seemed one step ahead. To Daniel, working under him felt like a blessing. He thought he was learning from the best. But blessings sometimes hide curses. One evening, after a long day, most of the office lights had gone dark. Chairs were pushed under desks, computers shut down, and the hallways were silent. Only Daniel stayed behind. He was the type who never left work unfinished. That night, he sat at his desk, eyes heavy, fingers typing slowly on his keyboard. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. He wanted to finish the monthly report before heading home. The building was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the clicking of Daniel's keyboard. Then, a sound broke the silence, the faint creak of a door opening. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just the cleaning staff. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the corridor that led to the manager's office. Curiosity pulled at him. Daniel stood slowly, stretching his stiff shoulders, and walked quietly toward the sound. His footsteps were light, careful. As he neared the office door, he stopped. The door was slightly ajar, and through the small opening, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. Mr. Harris, the boss who was always smiling in meetings, who preached about discipline and honesty, was standing at the company safe. His tie loosened, his jacket thrown carelessly on the chair, sweat on his forehead. His hands moved quickly as he pulled out stacks of cash, shoving them into a black leather bag. Daniel's heart pounded so loudly, he was sure it would give him away. He froze where he stood, gripping the wall for support. His mind screamed, "This can't be real." Not him. Not the man everyone trusts. He wanted to step back, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. But his feet stayed planted. His eyes stayed fixed on the sight of his boss stealing from the company he had sworn to protect. The bag grew heavier as Harris stuffed more cash inside. Then he glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone might be watching. For a moment, Daniel thought their eyes would meet, but Harris quickly slammed the safe shut, zipped up the bag, and straightened his jacket. Within seconds, he was once again the polished, confident boss everyone admired, except Daniel now knew the truth. Daniel stumbled back to his desk before Harris walked out. He sat down quickly, pretending to type, though his hands shook so badly he could barely touch the keys. His face felt hot, his stomach heavy. He didn't know what to do. Should he confront Harris? Should he report it? Or should he stay quiet? The question spun in his mind, but before he could decide, the sound of polished shoes echoed down the hallway. Harris walked past, carrying the leather bag, his face calm, almost proud. He gave Daniel a quick nod. "Still working, Daniel? That's the dedication I like to see," he said smoothly, then disappeared into the night. Daniel sat frozen for several minutes after, staring at his screen but not seeing a word. The man he respected, the man everyone admired, was a thief. The next morning, Daniel walked into the office with heavy steps. He barely slept the night before. His mind kept replaying the image of Harris stealing from the safe. Yet when he entered, Harris was already there, smiling as usual, greeting employees like nothing had happened. He laughed at jokes, patted shoulders, and gave Daniel the same warm smile he always did. It was as if last night had never happened. But Daniel knew. He couldn't forget. For days he said nothing. He kept his head down, but inside he watched. Every detail, every move Harris made, Daniel noticed. He began to see things he had never noticed before. Strange numbers and reports, small financial gaps that didn't add up, meetings behind closed doors that stretched late into the evening. His suspicion grew. He started keeping his own notes, marking odd transactions, saving copies of reports, quietly building a picture of the truth. He told no one, not even his closest colleague. If Harris could betray the company, what else was he capable of? But Daniel underestimated his boss. One afternoon, as Daniel was gathering another suspicious file, his phone buzzed. A message from the HR department. Please report to Mr. Harris's office immediately. His chest tightened. He knew something was wrong. He walked down the hall, each step heavier than the last. When he entered, Harris sat behind his desk, calm as ever, a file open in front of him. Two HR managers sat at the side, their faces serious. Daniel, Harris said smoothly, we need to talk about your performance. Daniel blinked. Performance? Harris slid a paper across the desk. It was a report filled with errors. Errors Daniel knew he hadn't made. Harris leaned back, sighing as if disappointed. We've noticed a pattern. Careless mistakes, late work, irregularities in accounts. I can't allow this in my team. Daniel's mouth went dry. This wasn't true. He tried to speak, but Harris's cold eyes met his, and in that moment, Daniel understood. This was a setup. Harris knew. Harris had seen his suspicion, and now Harris was striking first. By the end of the meeting, Daniel was handed a termination letter. Fired. False accusations painted him as lazy and dishonest. His years of loyalty meant nothing. As he packed his things into a cardboard box, his colleagues whispered behind his back. Some looked at him with pity, others with judgment. No one dared question the boss's decision. Daniel walked slowly toward the elevator, his heart heavy, his box clutched tightly in his arms. As the doors closed, he looked up one last time. And there, standing at the end of the hallway, was Harris, smirking, that same confident, arrogant smirk that said, I won, and you can do nothing about it. Daniel lowered his eyes, but inside, a fire had been lit. He knew the truth. He had seen the truth. And if Harris thought he could destroy him so easily, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Daniel's world collapsed overnight. One day he was a respected employee, trusted by his colleagues, admired for his hard work. The next day, he was just another man carrying a cardboard box out of the building, his reputation shredded by lies. The company he had served so faithfully had turned its back on him in the blink of an eye, all because of the man he once respected most, Mr. Harris. At first, Daniel tried to believe it was just a bad dream. He woke up the next morning half expecting to get ready, dress in his usual shirt and tie, and drive to the office as if nothing had changed. But the reality struck when he sat at his kitchen table staring at the termination letter. The words burned into his mind. Careless, dishonest, unfit for the role. Lies, all lies. Yet those lies now defined him. The whispers spread quickly. Colleagues who once greeted him warmly now avoided him. A few sent short texts saying they were sorry to hear the news, but even those messages carried a cold distance. The truth was, nobody wanted to risk being associated with a man the boss had labeled as incompetent. And Harris, with his calm voice and fake concern, made sure everyone believed the story. Daniel's phone stopped ringing. His inbox went silent. The friends he thought he had at work slowly faded away. Bills piled up on his kitchen counter, and every time he opened his laptop to apply for jobs, a knot tightened in his stomach. What would he say in interviews? How could he explain why he was fired without sounding like a bitter man blaming his boss? As days turned into weeks, Daniel sank into a heavy loneliness. His small apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. He stared at the walls, wondering if Harris was sitting in his fancy office laughing at him. And the worst part, Daniel couldn't shake the image of Harris smirking as he left the office for the last time. That smirk haunted him. Meanwhile, news reached Daniel through social media and whispers from mutual contacts. Harris was thriving. His reputation had only grown stronger. At company events, people cheered his name. Higher management praised him for his leadership and discipline. Pictures appeared online of him at parties, raising glasses of champagne, smiling broadly as though nothing could ever touch him. Each new picture, each new compliment for Harris, was a dagger in Daniel's chest. The man who had stolen from the company, the man who had destroyed his career, was now standing taller than ever. And Daniel, the man who had done nothing wrong, was sitting alone in his apartment, unable to pay his bills. But fate has strange ways of working. One rainy evening, Daniel sat at his desk, his laptop open, his eyes blurry from staring at job listings that seemed hopeless. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of defeat. Then, while searching for an old file to update his resume, he stumbled across a forgotten folder on his USB drive. His hand froze. The folder wasn't new. It was something he had once used to back up office documents. Curious, he clicked it open. Inside were dozens of files. Reports, emails, spreadsheets. His tired eyes scanned them, not expecting much. But then, he noticed something strange. A series of emails, not his, not anything he remembered saving, sitting quietly in the folder. His heart quickened. He clicked one open. The screen lit up with words that made his blood run cold. It was an email from Harris. An email to a contact outside the company. In it, Harris casually discussed moving funds around, laughing about how nobody notices small gaps in the accounts. Daniel's hands trembled as he clicked another. This one was worse. Harris had detailed instructions about manipulating invoices, creating false numbers, covering tracks. He wasn't just stealing, he was orchestrating a web of fraud, and he was proud of it. Daniel's pulse raced as he opened email after email. Each one revealed more corruption, more arrogance. In one, Harris even mocked higher management, saying they were too blind to see the truth. In another, he mentioned using Daniel's reports as cover for certain missing funds. And in yet another, Harris bragged to a friend that he had a perfect scapegoat if anything ever went wrong. Daniel stared at that line for a long time. Perfect scapegoat. That was him. Harris had planned it all. Firing him wasn't just about suspicion. It was part of a bigger plan to protect himself. Daniel wasn't just unlucky. He was targeted. A mixture of rage and determination surged through him. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt alive again. He wasn't powerless. He had something Harris could never imagine, proof. Solid, undeniable proof. But with that proof came a heavy question. What should he do with it? He couldn't just walk back into the office and wave the emails around. Nobody would listen. They would say he was a bitter ex-employee, fabricating lies. Even if someone believed him, Harris was clever. He would twist the story, claim the emails were fake, and turn the tables again. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen. He realized he needed to be smart. Smarter than Harris. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival. If Harris found out he had the emails, Daniel knew he'd try to destroy him completely. So he began to plan quietly. He copied the emails onto multiple drives, hiding them in different places. One in his apartment, another at his brother's house, a third saved securely online. He knew he couldn't risk losing them. Harris was powerful, and if he ever caught on, he would do anything to erase the evidence. At the same time, Daniel started reading carefully through each message, building a timeline of Harris's crimes. Every number, every transaction, every shady deal, Daniel marked it all. His apartment became a small investigation room, papers and notes scattered across the table, sticky notes on the walls, arrows connecting names and dates. As the puzzle came together, one thing became clear. Harris wasn't just stealing a little money. He had been running a full-scale fraud operation for years. Millions had disappeared, and Harris had made it look like normal business. But Daniel also realized something else. Harris's pride would be his downfall. The emails showed not only theft but arrogance. Harris bragged, mocked, laughed at those who trusted him. These weren't just numbers. These were words. Words that could destroy him if the right people read them. For the first time, Daniel felt hope. Yet the fight was far from over. Each night he worked on the files, but fear lingered in the back of his mind. What if Harris suspected? What if someone from the company came knocking at his door? He couldn't tell anyone yet. Not his neighbors, not even his family. The secret was too dangerous. And then one night, as he was going through the emails again, he found one that made him stop breathing for a moment. It was short, just a few lines, but its meaning was explosive. Harris had written to a partner, "Don't worry. Even if someone talks, I've got the CEO wrapped around my finger. He'll never believe anyone over me." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his hands covering his face. This wasn't just about money anymore. Harris was untouchable, or at least he thought he was. He had power, connections, and the blind loyalty of the people at the top. But Daniel had the truth, and he wasn't going to let Harris bury it. He closed his laptop, staring at the dark window where rain slid down in streaks. Outside, the city lights flickered, unaware of the storm building in one small apartment. For weeks, Harris had laughed, celebrated, mocked him. But now Daniel had something more powerful than Harris's smirk. He had the evidence. And though fear gripped him, one thought echoed in his mind. Harris ruined me with lies. I will ruin him with the truth. Daniel had always thought of himself as a man of patience, someone who did his work quietly and never looked for shortcuts. But now, patience had turned into something else. It became obsession. The USB drive, once just a forgotten tool from his office days, had now become his weapon. And each night, as the city outside drifted into sleep, Daniel sat at his desk, staring into the glow of his laptop, opening one email after another. What he found in those messages was not just corruption. It was arrogance. It was confidence so deep that Harris didn't even try to hide his crimes. Every email dripped with pride, as if he believed he was untouchable. Daniel read carefully. The first email showed Harris instructing a junior accountant to adjust numbers so the monthly balance looked clean. The language was subtle, hidden under technical terms, but Daniel could see the truth. Then came another email to an outside contact, casually discussing transferring funds offshore. Harris wrote like it was just a normal business deal. As Daniel scrolled, the hours disappeared. He forgot to eat. He forgot to sleep. His eyes burned, his hands shook, but he couldn't stop. Each message revealed another piece of the puzzle, another brick in the wall of fraud Harris had built. The most chilling part was how Harris had involved him in small ways, without Daniel even realizing it back then. In several emails, Harris referred to using Daniel's reports as a cover. Daniel had worked late nights creating those reports, believing he was doing good work. But Harris had twisted them, used them as a shield to hide the missing money. When Daniel realized this, he felt sick. It wasn't just that Harris had betrayed the company. He had betrayed him. Harris had taken Daniel's loyalty, his hard work, and turned it into a mask for his crimes. And then, when Harris no longer needed him, he had thrown him out like garbage. But then Daniel came across something that made him stop breathing. One particular email. Harris had written to a close partner, "Daniel's perfect for this. He doesn't ask questions, just does what he's told. If anyone ever looks too closely, I'll pin it all on him." A perfect scapegoat. Daniel's stomach dropped. There it was in black and white. Proof that Harris had always planned to destroy him if things went wrong. Every sleepless night, every humiliation, every whisper in the office hallway. It had all been part of Harris's plan. Anger burned in Daniel's chest. His hands clenched into fists as he read the words again and again. Harris had ruined his life, stolen his reputation, and now sat comfortably in his office, pretending to be a hero. But Daniel also knew something else. These emails were powerful. They weren't just numbers or files. They were words straight from Harris's mouth. Words that could bring down a man who thought he was untouchable. He began to organize them. Slowly, carefully, methodically. He printed copies, spread them across his table, highlighting key lines. His apartment looked like a detective's office now. Strings of paper, sticky notes, arrows connecting one email to another. Daniel built a timeline showing how the fraud had started, how it grew, how Harris manipulated everyone around him. It wasn't easy. Some nights he doubted himself. What if nobody believed him? What if Harris turned the story again? After all, Harris was powerful, respected, admired. And Daniel? He was just a fired employee with a broken reputation. But each time doubt tried to crush him, he went back to that one line, a perfect scapegoat. He whispered it aloud, letting the anger fuel him. He knew he had been framed, and now he had the proof to clear his name. Still, Daniel knew he couldn't act recklessly. If Harris even suspected he had these emails, Daniel could be in real danger. Harris had power, money, and connections. He could make people disappear from the company, ruin careers, maybe even worse. So Daniel kept everything hidden. He saved the emails onto multiple flash drives. He hid one inside a box of old books, another under the floorboard near his bed, another at his brother's house. He even created a secret online storage account under a fake name. If anything happened to him, he wanted to make sure the evidence survived. As days passed, Daniel's obsession grew. He memorized lines from the emails, played them over and over in his head. He could almost hear Harris's voice in those words, mocking him. But with each passing night, the fear in Daniel's heart slowly transformed into determination. One night, as he read through the messages again, he found something unexpected. An email not about money, not about fraud, but about power. Harris had written to a friend, "The CEO thinks I'm his loyal man, but really, I control him. He trusts me blindly. I can bend him any way I want." Daniel sat back in shock. This wasn't just about stealing. This was about manipulation at the highest level. Harris wasn't just robbing the company. He was playing everyone, even the CEO. And if Harris truly had that kind of grip, then exposing him would be even more dangerous. But it also meant one thing. If Daniel managed to leak the right evidence, the fall would be bigger. Harris wouldn't just lose his job. He would lose everything, his career, his reputation, his freedom. Daniel couldn't help but imagine it. The image of Harris being exposed, his smirk wiped off his face, his lies unraveling in front of everyone. It gave Daniel strength. Yet he also knew the path ahead was dangerous. If he rushed, he could fail. If he hesitated too long, Harris might cover his tracks. Daniel needed a plan. He began drafting anonymous letters, testing different ways to present the information. Should he go to the CEO directly? Or would that be too risky, given Harris's influence? Should he send the emails to the board? Or maybe to journalists who would publish them? The choices weighed heavily on him. One wrong move could end everything. For now, he decided on one thing: patience. He would not act until he was absolutely ready. He would study the emails, find the perfect angle, the perfect timing. Harris thought he had destroyed Daniel. But in truth, Daniel was gathering strength, building a weapon Harris would never see coming. The nights grew longer, the evidence piled thicker, and Daniel's resolve stronger. He was no longer the quiet man who bowed his head and followed orders. He was a man with a mission, a man who had been betrayed but refused to be broken. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The real game hadn't started yet. But when it did, Harris would regret ever underestimating him. Daniel spent the next few days in silence, carefully preparing his plan. He knew Mr. Harris was dangerous, and one wrong move could destroy everything. But Daniel also knew he could not stay quiet anymore. The unfair firing, the lies, the stolen money. It was too much to ignore. Daniel had gathered enough evidence, but he wanted more. He wanted something that would completely expose Harris, something so undeniable that no one could protect him. One night, Daniel sat in his small apartment, the dim light of his laptop glowing in the darkness. His fingers shook as he scrolled through the copied emails. Each one was a weapon. There were clear messages where Harris told suppliers to overcharge, then secretly refund part of the money into his personal account. Other emails showed him manipulating company finances and even bribing a local inspector. Daniel couldn't believe how deep the corruption went. But the most shocking emails were the ones where Harris mocked his employees. He called them fools, puppets. And in one message, he even wrote about Daniel, saying, "He's too loyal to ever betray me. Pathetic." Reading those words lit a fire inside Daniel. He clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "He thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'll stay silent. He's wrong." The next morning, Daniel put on his old office clothes even though he no longer worked there. He wanted to remind himself who he used to be and why he had to fight back. He went to a quiet cafe, ordered black coffee, and opened his laptop. One by one, he uploaded the damning emails to an anonymous account. He didn't just leak them randomly. He carefully sent them to the company board, major clients, and even a local news reporter who was famous for exposing corruption. Every click of the mouse felt like a nail in Harris's coffin. As he hit send on the final email, Daniel's heart pounded. It was done. There was no going back now. First, nothing happened. The next day was quiet, almost too quiet. Daniel doubted himself. What if no one believed the emails? What if Harris found a way to cover it up? But then, on the third day, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an old colleague. "Daniel, you need to see the news. Now." Daniel rushed to turn on the TV, and there it was. Mr. Harris's face on the screen, the reporter reading out loud the shocking details of the leaked emails. The anchor said, "This morning, explosive evidence revealed possible corruption and theft by the CEO of Harris Enterprises. The board has called for an emergency meeting, and several clients have already cut ties." Daniel stared at the screen, unable to move. It was working. His revenge was finally unfolding. Meanwhile, at the office, chaos broke out. Employees whispered in panic, clients called non-stop, and the board demanded answers. Harris stormed through the halls, shouting that the emails were fake, that someone was framing him. But no one believed his words. The evidence was too strong, too detailed. Daniel could almost imagine the look on his boss's face, the fear, the desperation. But Harris wasn't finished. That evening, Daniel received a blocked call. Against his better judgment, he answered. Harris's angry voice crackled on the line. "You think you're clever, Daniel? You think you can destroy me? I made this company. I made you. You'll regret this." Daniel took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm. "No, Harris. You destroyed yourself. All I did was show the truth." There was silence on the line, followed by a sharp click. The call ended. Daniel knew Harris wouldn't give up easily. He had money, connections, and power. But for the first time, Daniel felt stronger. He had pulled the first thread, and Harris's whole world was unraveling. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake, wondering what Harris's next move would be. Would he try to silence him? Would he use his influence to bury the story? The suspense hung heavy in the air. But deep down, Daniel knew something had changed forever. The mighty boss who once smirked while firing him was now cornered, exposed, and losing control. And Daniel? He wasn't done yet. The revenge had only just begun. Daniel sat frozen in front of his laptop, staring at the chilling message on his screen. "If you don't stop, you'll regret it." His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't delete the email. He saved it. He knew this was just the beginning. Mr. Harris was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. Daniel closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. He whispered to himself, "So this is how he fights back, through fear." But Daniel had already lost his job, his reputation, and his peace. There was nothing left for Harris to take, except his life. And Daniel refused to live in fear anymore. The next day, Daniel went to the grocery store. As he walked down the parking lot with his bag, he noticed a black car slowly rolling behind him. He tried to ignore it, but when he glanced over his shoulder, the car stopped, and a man inside stared at him with cold eyes. Daniel's hands tightened on the grocery bag. He walked faster, entered his building, and locked the door behind him. His mind raced. Was Harris sending people to watch him? The thought made his stomach twist, but strangely, it also fueled his determination. If Harris wanted to scare him into silence, then Harris was more desperate than Daniel thought. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep again. He paced around his apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds. He thought about Harris, his smirk, his lies, his threats. For years, he had admired that man, trusted him like a mentor. And now he saw him for what he truly was, a thief who used power to crush anyone who stood in his way. Daniel opened his laptop again and reread the emails. But this time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Hidden in one of the long chains of messages was an attachment, a scanned document. He clicked on it and his eyes widened. It was proof of an offshore account. Millions of dollars moved secretly, with Harris's signature at the bottom. This was bigger than Daniel ever imagined. It wasn't just company money. Harris had been laundering funds for years. Suddenly, the threats made sense. Harris wasn't just protecting his job. He was protecting his entire empire of corruption. Daniel leaned forward, whispering to himself, This will finish him." The next morning, chaos erupted again. The leaked emails had spread further. Social media exploded with anger, employees were quitting, and clients were cutting contracts faster than Harris could stop them. The board of directors called another urgent meeting, this time with lawyers present. Harris was sweating. For the first time, the man who always looked untouchable was visibly cracking. He slammed his fist on the conference table, shouting, "These are lies. Someone is framing me." But when the board members showed him the offshore account attachment, his face turned pale. He stuttered, unable to explain. Outside the building, reporters surrounded the company like vultures. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward, and every headline screamed the same thing. CO exposed for theft and corruption. And where was Daniel? Sitting in the same cafe with his black coffee, watching it all unfold on the big TV screen. He almost smiled, but his victory was not complete. Harris still had power, still had money, and the threats showed he wasn't afraid to use them. As Daniel watched, his phone buzzed again. Another message. This one was darker. "Stop now or your family will suffer." Daniel froze. His family. He thought of his younger sister in another city, of his elderly parents living quietly in a small town. Harris was crossing lines Daniel hadn't expected. His hands trembled as he dialed his sister's number. "Are you okay? Has anyone come by? Have you seen anything strange?" She was confused but reassured him that everything was fine. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the fear. He realized this was no longer just about exposing Harris. Now it was personal. Harris wanted to break him completely, but Daniel was ready. He decided to take the next step. He arranged a secret meeting with the reporter who had broken the first story. They met in a quiet diner at night, the neon lights buzzing outside. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, leaned forward as Daniel slid a flash drive across the table. "What's this?" she asked. Daniel whispered, "The real proof. Offshore accounts, bribes, money laundering. Everything Harris has tried to hide. Once this is out, he's finished." Claire studied his face. "You know he won't go down quietly, right? You're painting a target on your back." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know, but he destroyed my life. I won't stop until I destroy his lies." As Claire left with the flash drive, Daniel sat alone in the diner, staring out the window. The night felt heavy, the shadows thicker than usual. A part of him wondered if Harris's men were already watching. But he also felt something else, strength. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had control. Meanwhile, back in Harris's luxurious home, the boss poured himself a glass of whiskey. His hands shook as he read the latest headlines. The board was turning against him, the clients were gone, and now even the law was circling. He paced the room like a trapped animal, muttering, "I'll find him. I'll crush him. No one does this to me," and walks away. He picked up his phone and called someone. "Make it clear," he said coldly. "If Daniel doesn't stop, he won't live to see another day." The next evening, Daniel returned home to find his front door slightly open. He stepped inside cautiously and froze. On his table lay a single bullet with a note beside it. "This is your last warning." Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, the bullet on his table shining dull in the lamplight. The note beside it had only 3 words. "This is your last warning." His chest felt tight. For a moment, all the noise in the city vanished. He looked around his small apartment as if the walls themselves might hide a threat. Nothing else was out of place. Still, the message was clear. Harris had gone beyond threats. He had crossed a line. He picked up the bullet with trembling fingers and put it inside an envelope. For the first time since the emails, fear rushed into him like cold water. He thought of his family, his sister, his parents, and how helpless he had felt when someone had tried to use them as leverage. But then a steady thought returned, the same quiet voice that had pushed him through every sleepless night since the firing. You did nothing wrong. You have the truth. Daniel did not go to the police that night. He had learned that Harris had influence, and he feared the wrong officers might be on the boss's side. Instead, he did the thing he had trained himself to do: be careful, be smart. He took pictures of the bullet and the note, logged the time, and then called Claire, the reporter who had already published the first stories. Claire answered quickly. Do you have it? She asked. Yes, Daniel said. His voice was low, but steady. They've crossed a line. I think they want to scare me. I need help. Stay where you are, she said. I'll contact my editor. We'll get the story out. And Daniel, be careful. While he waited, Daniel packed a small bag. He put the flash drives in a hidden pocket, printed copies of the most important emails, the offshore documents, and the scans Claire had asked for. He texted his sister in a coded message to make sure she would stay at her friend's place for the next few nights. Then he locked his apartment and left, moving like someone who knew how to be invisible. Outside, the night air felt sharp. He walked to a cafe 2 streets away and sat in a corner, watching the door. He could not shake the feeling that someone watched him, that any shadow could hide a man sent by Harris. But Claire's article arrived online sooner than he expected. The headline was blunt: Top CEO accused of massive fraud, new evidence points to internal conspiracy. The story was long, detailed, and damning. Claire had quoted from the emails, reproduced key lines, and included the offshore documents Daniel had given her. She had also included Daniel's anonymous account of the events, how he had seen Harris at the safe, how he had been fired to cover the truth, and how he had kept copies of the emails. The reaction was immediate. The company's phone lines lit up. Investors demanded answers. The board issued a statement promising a full investigation. The city's financial crimes unit sent officers to the company headquarters. Clients canceled contracts faster than Harris could call for damage control. Inside the building, Harris paced like a trapped animal. He shouted at his legal team. He called senior executives, begging, promising, threatening in his sharp voice that usually commanded respect. But now there were headlines, there were lawyers, and there were law enforcement officers who had iced looks and questions ready. His confident armor had gaps in it now, big, bright holes that everyone could see. Daniel watched all of this from the safety of Claire's newsroom as it fell apart on the news feed. He felt the old bitter taste of satisfaction, but it was not the only thing. He felt tired, drained from nights of fear and planning. He thought of the years he had given to the company and how he had been tossed aside. He wanted justice, not just revenge. He wanted the truth to straighten his name and to make sure Harris could never hurt another person the way he had. Then, without warning, the world tilted again. He received an anonymous call. No voice, just a click, and then a recorded message. You were warned. The line went dead. For a second, anger flared hot in Daniel's chest. He could feel the danger, yes, but he also felt the net tightening around Harris. The law was moving now, and even a dangerous man like Harris could not hide forever. The Financial Crimes Unit had found enough probable cause to begin freezing accounts pending an investigation. That offshore account, the one with Harris's signature, was a lead investigators could follow across borders. The money trails were ugly. Still, Harris did not give up. He tried the only things left available to a desperate man. He attacked reputations, hired private investigators to dig into Daniel's past, and tried to create doubt about the origin of the leaked emails. He called old friends at the company and made public statements claiming his inbox had been hacked and that someone had fabricated the emails. He told his side of the story with the same calm, polished words that had convinced so many before. But the emails were real. Forensic analysts worked on them and found timestamp metadata that matched Harris's known devices. The chain of money transfers linked to accounts and shell companies that Harris used to launder funds were traced through a maze of transactions that only a smart man with years of experience could create, and yet the trail ended at his doorstep. As the investigators dug, they found signatures, approvals, and even recorded meetings where Harris had instructed subordinates. Each piece fit together like a puzzle. The board, now terrified for their own reputations, appointed an independent committee. The CEO, who had once hailed Harris as his most trusted lieutenant, now sat in a windowed office and listened to lawyers explain how powerful men sometimes bend the truth for their own gain. The title and accolades that Harris once wielded were turning brittle, like an old statue eroding in rain. One afternoon, Daniel received a message from the company's new investigator. An offer, blunt. "We would like to meet and discuss your information. We need your full cooperation." The message felt surreal. For weeks, the company had called him a liar and scapegoat. Now they came asking for his help. He thought of the days he had stood late in the office and watched Harris move with that smug confidence. He thought of the cardboard box and the whispers, the late nights and threats. The path to justice often travels through irony. Daniel agreed to meet, but not at the company. He met the investigators in a government building with glass doors and a steady guard at the entrance. There, men and women in plain suits asked him precise questions about dates, about files, about the way Harris had used his reports. Daniel answered honestly. He handed over his drives, his printed emails, and the copies of offshore documents. For the first time in months, he felt like someone was listening, not to a fired employee, but to a witness. The investigators treated the evidence with a careful attention that felt almost sacred. They made copies, ran forensic tests, and asked detailed questions about the email's origins. Daniel watched them work and felt small, like a man who had ignited a complicated machine he did not fully understand. Yet the machine was working in his favor. As the investigation advanced, Harris's allies dwindled. Some executives who had once sided with him stepped away when lawyers demanded transparency. Clients who had once trusted the company cut ties to protect themselves. The press continued to churn out stories, and public opinion swelled against Harris. One evening, as the city lights dimmed and a chill crept in the air, Daniel received a message he had both feared and hoped for. "Harris has been detained for questioning. Please come to the station to provide a statement." The words felt like a final knot in a long thread. He went. At the station, Harris sat in a small room under bright lights. He looked different, older, the polished veneer dulled and cracked. He had a lawyer at his side, a man with a suit and a practiced smile. Harris tried to speak before the questions. He tried to assert his innocence. He used the same lines he always did, the same commands to control a room. But now the questions were harder and louder. Officers presented logs, traced accounts, showed recorded approvals, and asked why his name appeared in transactions disguised as routine expenses. Harris's face betrayed panic for the first time. His voice, which had commanded people into obedience, trembled. He claimed he was set up, that someone had planted the emails to ruin him. The officers listened and then returned to the evidence. Every lie he offered had a counter. The metadata, the signatures, the timestamps, these were not easily faked. Harris's story began to fall apart. When Daniel entered the room to give his statement, Harris looked up. Their eyes met for a second, and Daniel saw not the man who had once mocked him, but a man undone. The air was thin between them. Daniel took a breath and told the truth, simply and plainly. He described the night at the safe, the way Harris had stuffed the money into the bag, the way he had used Daniel's reports as a cover. He did not yell. He did not gloat. He spoke steady facts. Each word was a hammer striking at the last supports of Harris's defense. By the end of the interview, Harris sat slumped, a defeated figure. The officers escorted him out in handcuffs. The images of him being led away were broadcast on the news within hours. People on the street stopped and watched. The man who had once stood at the top, smiling and powerful, was now a suspect in a crime that could end his life as he knew it. In the days that followed, court papers were filed. Charges ranged from embezzlement to fraud to money laundering. The news grew louder. Daniel's name finally cleared in public conversation. Interviews called him a whistleblower, an ex-employee who had taken a stand. Some people praised him, some warned him that it had been dangerous, and some still whispered that he had been reckless. But the truth was out. One morning, as the sun warmed the city, Daniel received a call from the CEO. The The voice on the other end was quiet, respectful. "Daniel," he said, "I want to apologize for what happened. We were blind. We treated you badly. If you're willing, I want to offer you your job back. With a promotion. We need people like you." The offer was real, tempting. It would mean stability, a steady income, and the restoration of his old life. It would mean letting go of the box he had carried for months. It would be an official apology in the form of a title and a desk. Daniel thought about the offer long and hard. He remembered the late nights he had sat at his old desk, the way Harris had watched him like a piece on a board. He thought of how quickly loyalty had been replaced by accusation. He thought of the fear he had felt, the bullet on his table, the phone threats. He thought of the days he had eaten alone and the nights he had barely slept. In the end, Daniel answered the CEO with quiet words. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't go back to the same place where I was betrayed. I can't trust that nothing like this will happen again." He paused. "However, I will help the company transition. I will work with investigators and help train an ethics team. I want to make sure this never happens again." The CEO agreed, and soon Daniel began working as a consultant. He helped to redesign internal controls, worked with auditors, and sat on panels that taught executives how to avoid the very corruption that had ruined him. He found a new kind of work, one that let him use his pain to protect others. It was not the same as his old job, but it felt honest. As for Harris, the courts were slow but relentless. Evidence piled up, witnesses testified, and the jury listened. Months of testimony and documents turned into a verdict. Harris was found guilty on several counts. He was sentenced to years in prison and heavy fines. The offshore accounts were seized. The company recovered some of the lost funds, but the damage to its reputation lingered for a long time. Harris lost his title, his money, and the respect he had built. The smirk that once defined him had been replaced by a hollow silence. The final days of the trial felt anticlimactic to some. Money and power could not erase the truth, and yet the aftermath required healing. Daniel attended only some of the hearings. He did not want to sit through every humiliation Harris faced. He had wanted justice, and now he had it. He wanted to move on. Months later, standing in a small office in a different building, Daniel looked out over the city. The winter had given way to spring. Trees along the street he once walked to the old office were budding new leaves. He thought of the path that had brought him here, the job, the night at the safe, the firing, the emails, the danger, the courtrooms. He thought of Claire and the investigator who had believed him. He thought of his sister and parents who had stayed safe. The victory had not been a clean one. He had lost time, peace, and trust. But he had gained something else, respect, not from titles but from the knowledge that he had stood for the truth. People who once turned away now greeted him with nods. He was no longer a scapegoat, and that made a difference he could not measure. In the quiet of his new office, Daniel took out the small envelope with the bullet inside. He held it for a moment, and then he set it on a shelf among other small tokens, reminders, not trophies. He had survived a storm. He had weathered the worst a powerful man could do. He had not let fear win. At night, when the city lights twinkled like distant stars, Daniel sometimes walked past the old company building. He would slow, look up at the windows, and then walk on. He no longer worked there. He no longer wanted the job that had cost him so much. He had found a new life, one not built on blind loyalty, but on careful watchfulness and quiet strength. One afternoon, months after the trial, a young employee approached him at a seminar Daniel was giving about corporate ethics. The man's voice shook as he said, "Thank you. You saved me from making the same mistake." Daniel placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. He smiled without bitterness, a small, simple smile. "Do the right thing," he said, "even when it's hard." And as he left the room that day, Daniel felt something he had not felt in a long time: peace. Not the loud, clanging satisfaction of revenge, but the steadier warmth of justice served. He had been broken. He had been mended. He had been changed. In the end, Harris had lost everything he cared about. Daniel had lost much too, but he had used that loss to rebuild something stronger. He had turned the dark night into a test, and he had walked through it. The Truth had 1. Subscribe and like for revenge stories.